You remember that the last story that we looked at was the rich young ruler. And as we looked at it, Jesus was on a journey. He was heading out. In fact, verse 17 of Mark makes that clear. But here in our text, for the very first time, we learned that Jesus was not just heading south to Judea. He was heading south all the way to Jerusalem. This makes perfect sense to us because in the previous two prophecies of Christ about his death, Jesus placed his death within the context of a legal proceeding. Remember what chapter 8 says. He'll be delivered into the hands of men. Remember what chapter 9 said. And the elders and the chief priests and the scribes would reject him. In other words, Christ was going to suffer in the hands of the legal system of the Jews. Where did the legal system of the Jews reside? Well, let me ask you something. Where's the Supreme Court of the U.S.? Washington. Why is that? It's the capital. Where is the Jewish Supreme Court? In Jerusalem. When Christ says, I'm going to be rejected by these individual chief priests, the scribes, who are those people? Those are people who sit on the Sanhedrin, which is the Supreme Court of the Jews, which resides in Jerusalem. So we had gotten some hints along the way that Christ was headed to Jerusalem, but here it becomes clear because why? He says he's on his way to Jerusalem. The significance of Jerusalem cannot be overstated. These events would take place in the nation's capital, at the very core of the spiritual life and the system of the Jews, the home base for the leadership of the nation itself, a leadership that was not just supposed to have cultural and economic concerns, but the spiritual concerns of the people. Jesus, throughout the Gospel of Mark, had mentioned the kingdom of God and identified himself as a ruler. It was the kingdom's gospel that he had heralded. So if Christ is a king, if he's preaching the kingdom's gospel, then that must mean he's got to have a capital out of which his kingdom is to be manifested. So Christ is going to the capital to present himself as the king. It had to happen. At some point in the life of Jesus, if he is who he said he is, he had to eventually end up in Jerusalem and make a statement about his kingship. This helps you understand the weight of what's going on here. Christ is on the road heading to Jerusalem. The whole nation is going to be in Jerusalem. Why? Because it's the Passover, one of the three feasts that every Jewish male had to attend. So Christ, on the way to Jerusalem with the rest of the Jewish nation to meet in the nation's capital, where Jesus will present himself as the ruler, as the king of the Jews. As was normal with a rabbi and his disciples, Mark tells us in the text that Christ was walking ahead of the disciples. Jesus was not trying to distance himself from these men, but rather this demonstrated the nature of the relationship between them and him. The disciples were his followers in every sense of the idea. Both spiritually and physically, they followed Christ. This identified them with him in a manner that will definitely come back to cause both them and him some concern when things go south in Jerusalem. Things are not going to go well in Jerusalem, y'all. In fact, you know that Peter denies him 3 times, right? What was the charge against Peter? We saw you with him. You're his follower. That was an official recognition. They're walking to Jerusalem. Jesus is ahead of them. His 12 disciples are behind him strategically. Why? Because that's what a rabbi and his followers did. They knew exactly who Peter was. Peter tried to deny his connection with Jesus, but he couldn't deny it because we saw you following him. Saints, identifying with Christ means you're going to be treated like Christ. Let me just tell you that straight up. Identifying with Christ, Peter and the rest of the disciples were identifying themselves with Christ. When you identify yourself with Christ, you better watch out because the world is going to treat you just like they treated Christ. Are you ready for that? His true followers are. Do you see what Christ is trying to prep these men for? They're walking behind Jesus. Do they know what they're walking into? Do you realize what you're identifying with me. You're connecting with me. You're my follower. Do you understand what following me means? Because I'm going to the cross. I don't know about that, Jesus. I'm ready for the good stuff, right? Right? But this cross thing? Oh, no. Maybe we need to rethink my commitment.